Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Shunyavadi Paschacha Desatarine Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangulangayate Girim Yakripa Tamaham Bande Siguru Dinatarinam. So I had promised that we were going to speak on the topic of sense gratification in this class. And I'm going to read some things that Prabhupada said, and then we'll discuss. I didn't have time to extensively prepare, but I had been giving a course on sexual purity, and that had triggered just the impetus, we could say, to do a class on sense control in general, sense gratification. So Prabhupada has termed this word sense gratification, I don't know if he's termed it, but he uses it frequently, sense gratification, as kind of a way to explain what people are doing in the material world. That's what they're trying to do. The whole goal is to gratify the senses. And in the Gita, Krishna says that the goal of materialists is their ultimate aim, the end-all and be-all is to gratify the senses, and it would be considered from a material perspective, the better you can gratify your senses, the more you're materially successful, or the happier you are. You might say that's an assumption that whoever gets the most sense gratification is the happiest, or whoever gets the most sense gratification is the most successful. And there may be some truth to that from the material perspective, because sense gratification is the only way that people know how to be happy. So if the goal is to be happy, and the way to do that is sense gratification, then it would follow that whoever gets the most sense gratification is the happiest. But I've always thought there's a little problem here, conundrum, paradox, in that we know there is no such thing as sense gratification in the ultimate sense. In the temporary sense, yes. But in the ultimate sense, they can't be satisfied. And Chanakya Pandit had said that there's three things that men are never satisfied with. And he said they're never satisfied with food, because even if you are, you want more 6 hours later. They're never satisfied with sex, because even if you are, you want more, whatever, 6 hours or 24 hours or next week or whatever. It's not something that can be satisfied. And people are never satisfied with life itself, because there's always something missing. So I've always thought the concept of sense gratification, the word that Prabhupada used, sense gratification, was kind of catering to the mentality of materialists. That's what they're trying for. But as devotees, we know gratification of the senses on the material level, it doesn't happen. Now, at the same time, we can't deny the senses, because, quote unquote, they need to be gratified to a certain level. But our form of gratification, it's different. And why is it different? Because the senses they bother us. If they're not engaged in Krishna service, they just it's just a nuisance, basically. So, okay, now I'm hungry, now I'm tired, now I have a sexual urge, now I want to see this, now I want to hear this. It's just a botheration, because it's pulling us away from our service and our meditation on Krishna. So But at the same time, we can't ignore them because we have a body. So then we have to, quote unquote, gratify them enough so they stop bothering us, right? So you have a small child, they're hungry. I'm hungry, please feed me. If you don't feed them, they're going to keep telling you they're hungry, right? So you have to feed them. And once they're fed, then they're happy, they go out and play, and they won't bother you anymore for food. So the senses are a bit like that. At least that's how we see them in Krishna consciousness, that they have to be gratified just to the point where they won't bother us. And the problem is, if you gratify them too much, they will bother you. If you don't gratify them enough, they will bother you. So in terms of gratifying the senses, Prabhupada has given this example that you can have the best road in the world, but still there are accidents. So in trying to satisfy the senses in a quote-unquote Krishna-conscious way, you have to be careful, because there's always the chance that one would go overboard. And when one goes overboard, so to speak, or engages in too much sense gratification, what happens? The senses become aroused, because the senses tend to be addicted to sense objects. And so the idea in Krishna consciousness is that our senses won't become addicted to sense objects, because if they do, then we become controlled by the senses rather than controlled by Krishna. So our idea is, okay, I have to satisfy them. Can I satisfy my senses in a way that they don't bother me? That's the trick. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, you eat. Now, what do you eat? You eat, as Prabhupada said, sumptuously. What is sumptuous? Rich food and sumptuous is not the same. You eat sumptuously, which means the prasadam is tasty, you're satisfied. How much do you eat? As much as you need, not more than you need. The prasadam is not extravagant. It's not floating in ghee, floating in paneer, floating in chili. It's simple, but it's delicious. It's sufficient to satisfy the tongue, sufficient to satisfy the stomach, sufficient to satisfy one's needs, but it's not extravagant. It's not going to agitate the mind or senses, because food can actually agitate our mind and senses. So we have to eat, but if we don't eat, our mind and senses will be agitated. So you understand the conundrum, and that's why Krishna says, balance it. Don't eat too much, don't eat too little. Don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. Because if you do too little of it, you get agitated. Because then you're not gratified. If you do too much, you get agitated because the addictive nature of sense gratification kicks in. And then you want more and more. Generally, if something is not that tasty or gratifying, there's not a strong inclination to overeat or overengage. It's just when it's very delicious or there's some other form of sense gratification that's an addictive nature, so we'll eat more or we'll do it more. We all have experience of that. So Krishna is saying keep the balance. And so for us as devotees, not too much, not too little, just enough salt that we're satisfied, not too much that it becomes a botheration. So that's the point. There's a balance point. Too much sense gratification, your mind's going to be disturbed, because then you'll be thinking about that sense gratification, you'll want more of it. It'll make it more difficult for you in Krishna consciousness. Too little, what'll happen? Your mind will be thinking about it. It's like if you eat too much, that preparation, some devotees have told me they've eaten a preparation so delicious that they always think about it until they get it next time. But similarly, or conversely, if you don't eat enough, you'll also be thinking about that preparation. Oh, it was so good, but I didn't get enough. So that's Krishna's point of balance. Don't do too much, don't do too little. So your body will be okay, it's satisfied, but it won't be agitated. That's the idea. Satisfied, but not agitated. That's the key. That's the mantra. And that's the name of this class. Satisfied, but not agitated. So, there's another aspect that's really important for us to understand. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Janma karma cha me divyam. My birth and activities are divyam, they're transcendental. evam yoveti tattataha. Nobody, how are you going to understand the tattva, the truth of my janma and my karma? Janma karma chame devyam evam yoveti tattva tyakta deha punarjanma naiti mameti sarjana. If you do understand, it's difficult to understand, but if you do understand, you won't take birth again. That's interesting verse to analyze. What does Krishna mean? Well, if you enter into the transcendental nature of his Leela, if you actually understand, those Leelas will liberate you from all material conceptions, material attachments, material desires, and so forth. So here's the problem. Krishna's Leelas, they're completely different than anyone else's Leelas, at least anyone else's Leela in this world. And we have this saying from Brahma Samhita, the eyes tinged with the salve of love, but you could also say the eyes tinged with the salve of sense gratification, because that's also true, right? Isn't it? His eyes were tinged with the salve of sense gratification. He only saw the world through the eyes of sense gratification. Everything he saw, he was trying to enjoy. Yes? So if our eyes are tinged with the salve of sense gratification, what do we see? Everywhere we see how we could possibly enjoy the objects of the senses. Eyes tinged with the salve of love. Everywhere we see how we can employ the objects of the senses in Krishna's service. So there is a very severe price that we pay for sense gratification. And here it is, and try to understand this, because I think this is important. Maybe you understand it, but I just want to emphasize it, because this is a discussion on sense gratification, and there is a price we pay for it. And the price we pay for it is we cannot understand Krishna Lila, and we cannot enter into Krishna Lila. We cannot relish Krishna Lila. And why is that important? Well, there are many reasons it's important. In this verse, we just quoted, Krishna said, you're not going to go back to Godhead if you don't understand my Lila. We could also say that relishing Krishna consciousness is an essential aspect of advancing. Relishing Krishna consciousness is part of the process. It's part of the way we advance. And so if we are engaged too much in sense gratification, we will not be able to relish Krishna consciousness. And specifically, as this verse says, or as this verse indicates or points us in the direction, that if one is engaged too much in trying to satisfy senses, you can't really understand Krishna Lila. Krishna Lila takes some penetration below the surface to understand what's going on. Otherwise, it's said if someone hears Krishna's activities with the gopis, they'll actually become sexually agitated. And of course, we know those activities have nothing to do with mundane sex, male, female, bodily conception, absolutely nothing. They're as far away from that as you could possibly go. They're light years, and zillions of light years away from that. But one who's engaged in sense gratification can't understand that there's any enjoyment beyond sense gratification. And so they're unable to penetrate into the Leelas of Krishna, and they can't relish them. They don't understand them. They don't know what they are. And when they read them, they either criticize Krishna or want to be like Krishna, want to imitate him, or want to make the excuse, when Krishna does this, why can't I do it? So that's the price we pay. Not being able to enter deeper understandings and deeper relish of Krishna Lila, that's a huge price, because there's so much nectar there, plus that's what's going to liberate us. And that's what devotees do. They relish Bhagavatam. That's Rasika. Rasika Vaishnavas. Bhagavatam is meant for relishing. And how can you relish Bhagavatam if you're trying to relish sense gratification? That's the whole point. Now, I want to back up a little bit to make another point. When we talk about sense gratification equals happiness, or the only happiness we know is sense gratification, just think about this. For us as devotees, we're experiencing happiness which is not derived from sense gratification. how many people in the world can experience happiness that's not derived from sense gratification? Well, you have to do something transcendental to derive happiness from something other than sense gratification. Because otherwise, the only source of happiness is coming from our body or from our mind. Or you could say maybe intellect. But think about it. How much could you enjoy if you didn't have senses? What would you do? Okay, you enjoy your mind, but Krishna says the mind's also a sense. So taking the mind to be a sense, in other words, it's a physical element. If you didn't have these physical elements, how much could you enjoy? And you think about it and think, there would be no enjoyment. I couldn't eat, I couldn't hear, I couldn't see. Now, what if you're a devotee and you could meditate on Krishna Lila? Could you enjoy? You could meditate on Krishna's instructions. You could say, okay, in your mind you chant Hare Krishna. Of course, what I'm saying is that the activities the devotees engage in are not activities of sense gratification, and they're relishing and they're enjoying. So for someone who can't experience that pleasure, doesn't have that pleasure, who's never had that pleasure, then for them, the only concept of pleasure is through one of the five senses or through the mind. That's the only way we know how to enjoy pleasure. So if you tell that person there's no pleasure in the world or there's no pleasure in sense gratification, for many of those people, unless they've experienced some kind of frustration in sense gratification, they won't understand that. And for them, if I can see beautiful things, if I can hear beautiful things, if I can sit in comfortable cars and chairs and homes, if I can touch soft things, if I can taste nice things, that's happiness. So if I get more money, I can have nicer things, I can have better sense gratification, then I can have better happiness. And it's only fortunate people who've experienced those things or who have the intelligence, even without experiencing those things, to understand that that kind of gratification has its limitation. And or if they're fortunate enough to experience spiritual gratification, then they'll experience a higher taste. So, you know that verse in Bhagavad Gita. I think it's quite famous, quite well known. Raso varjam rasopiyasya param drishva nivartante. Param drishva means higher taste. And in the purport, Prabhupada is explaining that basically nobody can give up sense gratification. The senses are they're like serpents. They're just wild. And if you try to renounce sense gratification, all I can say is, good luck, Prabhu. I wish you the best, because without a higher taste, it's going to be impossible to maintain. Because we have a body. The body's conditioned to enjoy. It's just the way it is. It just wants to eat. It wants to sleep. It wants to hear. It wants to have sex. It wants to enjoy. It wants to touch. It's just how the programming is, right? And as soon as you see something beautiful, you want to look at it. And you touch something, oh, it's so soft, it's so nice. And you taste something, give me more of that. Isn't it? It's just the way the body is, or, you're addicted to watching movies, or addicted to reading novels, or addicted to listening to this music, or, it's just, the whole thing's just a big sensual addiction. So in the Gita, Krishna is saying, and Prabhupada has quoted this verse many times because it's basically our way out of the material world. But by seizing such engagements, by experiencing a higher taste, one remains fixed in consciousness. So, what is Krishna consciousness? I'm just trying to put this in some context for you. Krishna consciousness is pleasure which is not derived from the body per se. It's not derived from gratifying the senses. Okay, you might say we're gratifying our senses with nice kirtan, bhajan, prasadam, classes, and so forth. Yeah, we are gratifying the senses, but it's not sense gratification. It's not that we're trying to gratify our senses for our own sense gratification. So, yeah, we're gratifying our senses, you can say that. But what we're speaking here is much different. So, unless you experience a pleasure beyond the five senses and the mind, you're pretty much trapped in the material world. And you're never going to get out of it because your senses will definitely keep you here. They'll just, when you're dying, you're going to be thinking about sense gratification. Because that's all you've been thinking about your whole life. So Krishna consciousness, it gives you something, some happiness which is not based on sense gratification. I distinctly remember, if I go back 49, how would I remember something from 49 years ago? Do you remember 49? Well, some of you are not old enough to remember. Okay, let's say 29. Do you remember what you were thinking 29 years ago? Specifically on a particular day? Well, I can remember 49 years ago what I was thinking on a specific day. Is that amazing? It must have been something very powerful. It was. This is what I was thinking. I was in a kirtan at the University of California at Berkeley. The kirtan was at the entrance way to the campus. I think it was the south entrance. Basically, that was the main entrance to the campus, or the only entrance, only official entrance. And I was in the kirtan. I was still a student. And in the kirtan, I had an experience that I'm happy. Right now, I'm as happy in this kirtan as any happiness I've ever experienced in my life. Surfing a wave, taking LSD, sexual encounters, whatever it is whatever degraded, stupid thing that I had done out of ignorance to enjoy my senses. If I thought of the highest pleasure that I got from any of those, when I was in that kirtan, I was thinking, this is really interesting because I'm experiencing that same kind of happiness, that high level of happiness that I got through these other things, but I'm not doing them. There's no sensual stimulus at all, and I'm experiencing that happiness. That was my first experience of transcendental pleasure, and I would say that was probably one of the most defining moments in me becoming Krishna conscious, because it was such an important realization to have, that there's pleasure beyond the body. And I was in the kirtan, and I was almost like I was bewildered, because I was thinking, this is amazing. There's no sensual stimulus coming to me right now. I'm not doing any of the things that I would normally do to enjoy. And I'm enjoying as much or more. I'm as happy as happy or more happy than I've ever been doing any of these other things. And it just hit me. This is not coming from a sensual platform. And then the next thing that hit me is that if this is true, then it seems that this pleasure, it's coming from a different plane, and I just intuitively understood that the quantity of this pleasure is not restricted by how able I am to gratify my senses, how beautiful my girlfriend is, how good is the music, how much money I have. It's not restricted by those things, but it's kind of like an ocean which I just have to learn to tap into. So it hit me so strongly that there's another source of pleasure. And that was the defining moment. And I'm sure all of you have had similar experiences. And so what Krishna is saying is, if you tap into that other source of pleasure, it will be better than any material pleasure. It will help you realize that source of pleasure does exist. It's transcendental, it's spiritual, it's better. You're going to be happier. And when you have that, what is the result? Detachment. You all know what hippies do, right? Hippies do everything wrong. Hippies are very sensual creatures, although they renounced, or so-called renounced, the lifestyle of materialism. They engaged in other kinds of materialism, maybe not the same as their parents, but intoxication and sex, two of the regulative principles. They were really good at it. They really stepped it up to another level. Their parents weren't as good at intoxication and sex as they were. So, the idea we're not materialistic, not really. You're just not materialistic in a particular way. Maybe you don't want a big house and a big car. You just want big sex and big drugs. So basically you're the same in so many ways. Sense gratification was the goal. So now, how is it that so many hippies became devotees and were able to give up those things and other things? Well, Raso Varjam Rasopiyasya. There's your answer. You get a taste, and your taste is a revelation. It's an epiphany. That this pleasure, this is what I want. This. See, the other thing is, which I think is really important, sense gratification may give you a temporary high, but it can't satisfy you. Whereas the spiritual, it's satisfying. It's like, this is what I'm looking for. So the reality is, we all know this reality, but I will just repeat it because hearing it again and again is necessary. The reality of the material world is there is no such thing as sense gratification because materially the senses can't be gratified. But there's no way out of that cycle unless we're Krishna conscious. And so if we're not sufficiently Krishna conscious, then we're caught in the middle of this cycle of trying to give up sense gratification without enough of a taste in Krishna consciousness. And basically, Prabhupada and Krishna are saying, that's impossible, you can't do it. Now, you can try, you have to try to control your mind, try to control your senses. But if you're trying to do it without a sufficient taste that you gather from associating with devotees, from hearing about Krishna, chanting good rounds, kirtan, and these things, if you're not getting sufficient taste, your effort to control your senses, it's not going to work. How do we know that? How can we say that? We have experience of that. But the Bhagavatam also, and Mahabharata, Ramayana, other scriptures are full of stories of people who weren't devotees, but they were sadhus, saints, sages, yogis, who were trying to control their senses. And on one fine day, they were in meditation. In their meditation, perhaps they've been meditating for 1,000 years. And they heard twinkle, 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 twinkle. They heard some ankle bells. You're in the forest, you're alone, you're meditating for 1,000 years. You hear some ankle bells. That was enough to open their eyes, break their meditation. Oh my God, what did they see? Something so beautiful that they couldn't control themselves. We have stories like this. Why do we have these stories? Just to emphasize that if you don't have a higher taste, good luck. Someday, sometime, somehow, someplace, you're going to crash. Now I have a story, the same story. Who was it? Vishamrita? Was it Vishamrita who fell for Menaka? And then he got so frustrated with himself that he fell that it happened again. And the next time he became, instead of falling, he became angry, which was a kind of, anger is a form of sense gratification. So it was a similar form of sense gratification in the sense that he fell to anger. So, and you have so many stories of sages becoming angry or becoming attracted to beautiful women and so on. And here we have these hippies who were the lowest of the low, or even lower than the lowest. They weren't the lowest of the low, but when they became hippies, they indulged their animal propensities unrestrictedly. And they become celibate brahmacharis? How is that possible? Doesn't make any sense. Param drishtani vartanti. Absorbed in Krishna Kirtan, absorbed in hearing and chanting. So, ladies and gentlemen, Prabhus, Matajis, female Prabhus, Papajis, mamas and papas, we have to try to control our senses, but if we're not absorbed and tasting Krishna consciousness, we're not going to be able to do it. We have the stories, we have the philosophy. That's it. And as I said, I want to emphasize this point, and then I'll take your comments, questions. As I said, I think the biggest downside of not being able to control our senses is that we cannot relish, we cannot understand, we cannot penetrate the depth of Krishna Lila. Because as long as we're still trying to imitate Krishna, how are we going to understand? How are you going to understand Krishna's love for the gopis if you're still trying to love gopis yourself. Until we're pure, that spark of love, that seed of love will not grow very much. And if we don't have some little drop of love, of higher, some kind of higher consciousness, how are we going to understand Krishna Lila? And that's the real payoff of Krishna consciousness, to be able to relish Krishna's Lila, to dive into Krishna's Lila. That's the real payoff. And that depth of relish of Krishna's Lila, it just keeps us going in Krishna consciousness. We wouldn't, if I indulge in sense gratification, I'm going to give up my ability to taste that Lila, to understand Krishna. I would never pay that price, ever. It's too expensive. You understand? So the relish, the ability to understand Krishna, to relish Krishna consciousness, is so profound. It's so special for us. And knowing that indulgence in sinful activity or sense gratification is going to hamper that, I would never do it. There's too much of a price to pay. Okay, yes, I would like to do this because this will gratify my senses, but what's the price? What am I paying? If I do that, I'm compromising my ability to enter more deeply into the Leelas of Krishna, into understanding the Leelas, into relishing Krishna consciousness. That is such a huge price to pay for a little bit of sense gratification. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't trade that off. That's what happens when you're tasting Krishna consciousness. That's why Krishna says, experiencing a higher taste, you can give up the lower taste, because that higher taste it's really higher. It's really deeper. It's really special. And the icing on the cake. What's the icing on the cake? How many people in the world can relish those Leelas, can understand Krishna consciousness, can taste Krishna consciousness? Not that many. Very few. There's a, what do you call those? Here, I'll show you. It's on the tip of my, you see this guy here? What do you call those? I can't. They're kind of, I don't know, kind of rare. Dragonflies, yeah, it's a dragonfly. So, yes. There's so few people so few people in the world can relish Krishna consciousness. And we're so fortunate we can relish it. Every time I go to Vrindavan, and I just feel the vibrations of Vrindavan. As soon as you get there, you feel it. It's not like any place you'll ever go. There's no place you can go that's like Vrindavan. Even Vrindavan materially, it may not look perfect as other places. But there's no place in the universe like Vrindavan. And when you go to Vrindavan, you feel something special. And when you feel it, you remind yourself that I'm really happy I'm a devotee, and I'm really happy I've made sacrifices, I've controlled myself so that I could go a little more deeply into Krishna consciousness, because of all that, now I'm here in Vrindavan and I'm able to experience something that's so sweet and so special and so different from anything any materialistic person could ever experience. And I'm so grateful for that experience, and I know that experience is coming because I've been able to some degree or another enter into Krishna consciousness by restraining myself, by restraining my senses and engaging my senses in pleasing Krishna. And I'm so grateful to have this experience, and I know the price I paid to get it, and I know the price is worth it. You ever have that experience when you go to Vrindavan, or you ever have the experience when you're relishing Krishna consciousness and you realize that the only way you've been able to relish this is you've paid a price in controlling yourself? And that price is worth it, don't you think? What you can get from Krishna, you can't get from anybody. There's no form of sense gratification that can compare to what you can get from Krishna consciousness. And then the last thing I want to say, and then we'll have some discussion, I also have things I could read from Srila Prabhupada if there's time. As Prabhupada has said, that we should see our senses as extensions of Krishna's senses. That's so it's a nice meditation. Like, these aren't my senses. This isn't my body. I wasn't given this body to use any and every way that I choose, but I was given this body and these senses to be extensions of Krishna's senses. My senses are meant to give pleasure to Krishna's senses. They're not meant to give pleasure to this physical body. I'm not even this body, so I spend my whole life gratifying something I'm not even. Think about that. That's like insanity on steroids. I spend my whole life gratifying something, and it's not even me, and it's not even going to remain. And so when I die and I chalk up all the sense gratification I've given this body, what does it amount to? It amounts to basically wearing my body out. I've got nothing to show for it but an aged, old, decrepit body, and all the pleasure that I've ever received throughout my life, I can't relish it. It's because it was all in the body, and the body's falling apart. Maybe I have some memories, but really, I can't relish the pleasure of those memories. It's all faded away. On the contrary, if I dedicate my life to Krishna, at the end of my life, I'm able to relish hearing and chanting, and I'll be thankful. Thank myself that I engaged in devotional service my whole life. And now at the end of my life, I'm able to hear and chant and relish Krishna consciousness and think of Krishna. I'll be so grateful for that. Otherwise, I've just gratified a body, and now the body's going, and I've got nothing to show for it except old age and disease. That's a pretty miserable condition, don't you think? Do you agree with me? Are you all breathing and alive and listening? Isn't it? I'm not the body, and I'm gratifying something I'm not. And I've dedicated my whole life to gratifying something I'm not. That's insanity. And at the end of life, I've got nothing to show for it but an old body. That's leaving me. Okay, thank you, body. You did some service, yeah. Yeah. So, anyway, Krishna Karshani had a comment or a question in the beginning, but perhaps I've already answered. Is it not that for different people, devotees, balance in sleeping, eating may mean something different? Yes. And we should not compare with others. Yes. In finding the balance, well, how much do I need to eat? That's easy. As soon as you burp, stop eating. We've eaten enough. Okay, answers that question, right? Okay, what quality of food should I eat? Eat food that satisfies. Basically, eating is satisfying three things. The tongue wants to taste something, the belly's burning, and the mind, right? Because you know if you eat something that's not good, your mind's not satisfied, even though your belly's full, isn't it? So, eating has several functions for us because we eat prasadam. Another function is purifying ourselves, and obviously the other function is nutrition to get energy. So if you eat food which is nutritious, you eat just enough to pacify your mind, your tongue, that's sumptuous enough, delicious enough, but not extravagant enough, then you can gratify your tongue without agitating it and without agitating your stomach because it's so delicious you just want to eat all day. You know what I mean? So yeah, so now, if you look at my diet, some devotees look at my diet and they tell me, you know, I could never eat like you. But if you look at the diet of most devotees my age, you'd probably say the same thing. I could never eat like you. Because when you get older, your need for high levels of sense gratification fortunately reduces to some degree, or at least for many people. So that's nice to know. So eat simple, eat what you require to be satisfied, but not more than that. And so yeah, like Krishna Karshani says, it's true, people will have different standards. I have a godbrother who gets up at 1:30 every morning. Maybe he goes to bed like 8, 9, I don't know. And then he takes a little nap later. For me personally, the way my body works, it doesn't like to get up without sufficient sleep. I don't like to sleep later in the day. Generally, I don't, unless I don't get sufficient sleep. But I like to get enough sleep, so I just go through the whole day. That's how my body works. So for me to get up at 1:30 and then maybe take a nap at 6 in the morning, it doesn't work so well for me. But I know other devotees, it works well for them. So that's fine. You reduce your sleeping, and you take a little more later, or you get enough rest. Some people need a little more sleep than others. Some people need to eat differently or more or less. Yeah. But the point is that our senses belong to Krishna. So if we gratify our senses, gratify them in a way that they're pacified and you can focus on your service. That it doesn't get in the way and doesn't agitate the addictive nature. So that's the point. So for you, maybe 7 or 8 hours of sleep. For my godbrother, maybe 5 hours of sleep. For so-and-so, deep fried sabji with curd. That's like bare minimum with a little sour cream on top. That's like bare minimum of satisfying his tongue. For somebody else, steamed vegetables and quinoa with little ghee and salt and pepper, and that's all they need, and they're satisfied. Okay. So, but it's the same principle, adjusted to the individual. So we have, from what you're saying, I understand that the way to stay in KC is relishing KC, and it looks that those who left KC did not find joy in it. I would say they didn't find steady joy, more or less, yeah. Well, let's take what you're saying and let's apply it to anything. How would you be dedicated? Let's say, Krishna Karshani, you want to study something. And so you're studying it and you're finding it really boring and just kind of a pain to study it. There's a good chance you're going to give up on it, or you'll finish that semester but you won't pursue it because you don't feel any connection with that topic and you don't get any pleasure from that topic, right? Let's say you're eating something. I personally don't like beets. Don't ask me why. I was born not liking beets. If you make beets for me, no matter how delicious those beets are, I'll eat like one, and you'll ask me, do you like it? And I'll say, it's good, but I don't like beets. So it's probably, I guess it's good. I guess other people would like it. I don't like beets. I can't eat it. Right? And you're like, oh my God, beets are so delicious. How could you not like this? That's what my wife says to me. How could you not like beets? They're so delicious. I don't know why I don't like beets. You know, it's like I don't like this song, or I don't like this picture. I don't know why I don't like it. This body doesn't like it, isn't it? So how are you going to engage in something if there's no taste? So when Krishna is saying, give up the lower taste by relishing Krishna consciousness, actually all he's saying is it's the same for anything. How are you going to continually do something where there's absolutely no relationship, no rasa, no taste? That's what happens in relationships. People are living together, after a while, it's just, there's nothing there between them. There's no pleasure, there's no happiness, there's a lot of displeasure. At least if it's neutral, you can kind of withstand it and do it out of duty. But that's hard for most people. If there's no pleasure in a relationship, to stay in it is really, really difficult, unless you're raised in a culture where that's just what you do. But I think the example with food is better. Or there's a song, you're hearing a song, you don't like the song, you turn it off. You like the song, let me hear that again, let me play that again. So the same thing in Krishna consciousness. Why would I engage in Krishna consciousness unless there's some taste, right? My daughter is returning. She just dressed the deities this morning. Isn't that cool? 17 years old and she's dressing the deities. Special mercy, huh? So, yeah, you are absolutely right that if the devotees aren't relishing Krishna consciousness, it's hard to stay in it. And you might say, why aren't they relishing it? Well, I think one of the reasons devotees don't relish it is they don't relish it. What do I mean by that? They don't do it. They don't do it enough to relish it. Okay, so Krishna Karshani wants to learn to play the piano, and it's so hard. Oh, that's so boring. I just want to play. And I say, Krishna Karshini, just keep practicing. One day, you're going to get it and you're going to love it. So she says, okay. She practices. And she's starting to get a feel for it, starting to learn how to play, starting to enjoy it. But if you don't practice it, you don't do it enough, you're not going to come to that point where you enjoy it. And then once you enjoy it, then the more you play, your enjoyment just shoots up. So if you don't engage enough in Krishna consciousness, how can you relish it? So that's part of the problem for some devotees. They're just not cultivating it. No, they're not reading Prabhupada's books. Their rounds aren't good. That leads to less reading. That leads to more bad chanting. So it's like a vicious cycle. When you stop hearing, you'll start hearing other things. You'll lose your taste for hearing about Krishna. When you stop chanting good rounds, you'll be distracted. You won't get much from your japa, and so on and so forth. So, yes. So, Krishna Karshani says, you said that Vrindavan is wonderful. I agree with you. But also many devotees are experiencing different types of suffering there, body suffering or mind suffering. Is it a price of being there? Suffering can make the devotees difficult to appreciate Vrindavan. Well, if your body is suffering there, well, that's different. I think it's different than your mind. Because the bodily suffering is, it's more difficult to avoid. But advanced devotees, even when their body suffers, they prefer to be in Vrindavan, and their minds are in ecstasy, their bodies are in agony. So we do have that experience, at least for advanced devotees. And mind suffering in Vrindavan, yeah, because everything's intensified 1,000 times, so your anarthas are intensified 1,000 times. So the example I was giving, or I thought I was giving, or let me clarify it, is that you're doing well in Krishna consciousness and you go to Vrindavan and then you relish it and you appreciate all the sacrifice you made and that is now enabling you to appreciate Vrindavan. So, but what you say is also true. If you go to Vrindavan in the wrong consciousness, then you're going to be agitated. And what is the wrong consciousness in Vrindavan? In Vrindavan, there is only one enjoyer. Out of Vrindavan, there's 7 billion enjoyers, right? But when you go to Vrindavan, if you go to Vrindavan with the mental bhav, emotion, attitude that I am the enjoyer, you will suffer like a dog. Krishna will kick you out. You can't exist in Vrindavan if you have that mentality. You can exist outside Vrindavan because that's kind of the mentality you need to exist in the material world. I am the enjoyer. Go for it. Work hard. Get ahead. Get that money in the bank. Enjoy. Build your mansion. Yeah. That works outside of Vrindavan. You don't even notice it. That won't bother your mind at all. That's just normal. Everybody does it. But when you go to Vrindavan, there's only one enjoyer there, and if you're not in the mood of serving that enjoyer, you have anything else, you will go nutty, because you don't belong in Vrindavan with that mentality, and Vrindavan is very intense, and that anartha will intensify. But if you go to Vrindavan in the right consciousness, it'll intensify the right consciousness, and your bliss will just go off the charts. So yes, what you're saying is true. There is another side. But I wasn't referring to people going there in that consciousness. I was referring to people who do the yajna, who do the austerity. I'm sitting outside here, and there's a desk out here, which used to be my office. Now it's my outdoor desk here for outdoor kata, and the desk is completely wet because it's early in the morning. I have to wash it off. So, Krishna Karshani just said, life goal to make her Guru Mahatma Prabhu love beets. Wow. Okay, I love beets as long as I don't eat them. How about that? I can love looking at them. No, here's the thing about beets. My wife loves beets. And if the beets are dried, I can eat them. Beet juice with carrots I can take. But no matter how I think once they shredded the beets and they shredded carrots and they cooked it together, and I couldn't really taste the difference. They spiced it so much. So if you do that, maybe you can get me to love beets. But yeah, as long as I love hearing about Krishna, I'm okay. If I don't love beets, no problem. I'll live without beets. Yeah. So I think one of the most important things that's coming out of this class is how the desire to enjoy or the desire to engage in sense gratification kind of dampens, or you could say even nullifies, our ability to enter into deeper understandings of Krishna Lila, Krishna philosophy. So you have to be in the right consciousness to understand, and you have to be in the right consciousness to relish. And understanding and relish are essential ingredients for advancing. And if we're not living in a fairly pure life, then we can't enter into that. That's in I think the second canto. You have to be pure to hear, and purity means pure in eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So the more pure we are in our lifestyle, the more we relish Krishna consciousness. The more deeply we relish Krishna consciousness, the more. Yeah. And then, if you're in the right consciousness, then when you go to Vrindavan, you relish it. When you go to Mayapur, you relish it. It's special. You just feel this is so amazing. If you're not in the right consciousness, then what happens when you go to Vrindavan? You didn't pay the price to be able to relish it, and you can't go deeply. And you see other people are going deeply, and you're looking at them, and you're thinking, what's wrong with me? That's the price we pay. Or you're hearing Krishna Katha, and people are relishing it, and you're not, and you think, what's wrong with me? So that's the price of sense gratification. You may gratify your senses for a few moments, but the consequence, the ramification of that is disastrous for our spiritual life. So that's a very strong impetus to be sense controlled, don't you think? That you, it enables you to relish Krishna consciousness. I think that's really the essence of this whole discussion. And that's, why would I give up something that I'm attracted to? Because that will interfere with my ability to go deeper in my relation with Krishna, or my ability to relish Krishna Katha. And to not be able to relish Krishna Katha or go deeper in my relationship, that would be the worst thing that could possibly happen, to not be able to relish chanting the holy name because of overly indulging in sense gratification. What did Prabhupada say? Sense gratification and Krishna consciousness, they don't go well together because they counteract one another. Like Krishna is saying, Raso Varjam Raso Piyasya, if you get this higher taste, you'll give up the lower taste. Flip it around. If you get the lower taste, you'll give up the higher taste. I mean, he didn't say that, but that's implied in that verse. Okay, let's add a purport to that verse. By experiencing the lower taste, one automatically will give up the higher taste. Raso Varjam, by experiencing the, what's the word for low? Adha. Raso Adha Varjam. By experiencing the lower taste, one will naturally give up the higher taste. So, yeah, that's what happens. So, Krishna Karshani was asking, well, maybe it's the people who leave Krishna consciousness weren't relishing it. Yeah, they were relishing the lower taste. So naturally, you relish the lower taste, you give up the higher taste. You relish the higher taste, you give up the lower taste. So, yes, that's a very important point. Thanks for bringing it up. Everyone be aware. Think, what's wrong with sense gratification? By relishing the lower taste, you give up the higher taste. When I was a young devotee, I don't know, I told this story before. Not a young devotee, when I was first learning Bhagavad Gita, I was really enthralled. But my faith was weak and my conditioning was strong. And I was living in one of the most liberal cities in the world, and there were so many alternatives, sensual ways of stimulating yourself. So when I would I was going to the temple and I was relishing and was appreciating Bhagavad Gita, but then I'd go to these other programs, and a lot of these other programs were enabling us to have a heightened sensual experience. And when I had these heightened sensual experiences, I would think, why are these devotees so down on sense gratification? This experience is phenomenal, what I'm going through now. It's just so special. How can they say sense gratification is no good, sense gratification is bad, sense gratification this and that? I couldn't understand it, right? So by experiencing the lower taste, it was making me feel like I don't need the higher taste. You know, you can get enough from sensual pleasures or mental pleasures. So yeah, that's what happens. By experiencing the lower taste, you give up the higher taste. Of course, you don't experience the lower taste as low, so that's a problem. You experience the lower taste as high, and then you equate that with the higher taste and think this is just as good or better than the higher taste. And the higher taste is a lot more difficult to experience. The lower taste, you get it instantly. You just go and do something, you get it. The higher taste, you have to pay for it. So obviously that can cause people to give up their devotional practice. I would say this, I'd never ever want to put myself in a situation where I'm not on a regular basis relishing Krishna consciousness, because that is dangerous, because that makes you susceptible to sense gratification. If your senses have to be satisfied with something. So I've always felt that I don't want to say duty, but I would say maybe the better word is necessity. I've always felt that it's been a necessity for my Krishna consciousness to be able to relish it. I don't want to use the word enjoy, because it has a bad connotation for us, because enjoy for us means the senses. But Prabhupada has used that word in relation to Krishna consciousness. But let's use the word relish. I've always felt it to be an essential necessity, an essential ingredient in my Krishna consciousness, to always be churning the ocean of nectar, like all the time churning it, discussing with devotees, reading, giving classes, churning it more, getting more deeply into my rounds, doing service that's exciting and inspiring. I just always found that if the ocean is being churned, then I don't have any problems. There's nothing's going to bother me, because everything else will be experienced as extremely inferior to Krishna consciousness. If I'm not churning the ocean of Krishna consciousness, then things are going to look pretty attractive, because Maya is Krishna's energy, and because it's Krishna's energy, it's really attractive. If you're not comparing it to Krishna, it's really attractive. It really looks good. I have some experience with audio, because I had a recording studio, and so in recording studios you have different microphones for different purposes. One microphone's good for this kind of voice, one microphone's good for voiceover, one mic is good for female voice, one mic is good for guitar, one mic is good for guitar amps, one mic is good for drum overheads, one's good for the bass drum. You have all these different mics for different purposes, right? And so if you went in my room and I gave a talk and recorded it and played it back, you would say, yeah, that mic sounds good. And I say, well, that mic only costs $25. Listen to my $400 mic. And then you'd listen to that and you'd say, oh my God, that's amazing. The $25 mic sounded good until I let you hear what it sounds like on the $400 mic. Yeah. It sounds like you're on the radio. Beautiful, crisp, and deep. Yeah, something like that, right? Where the other one sounds kind of like this, you know, it sounds okay, I can hear you. But when you're not comparing it to anything else, it sounds great. As soon as you compare it to something else, then you go back, what we call A-B it, mic A, mic B. Well, mic A doesn't sound good anymore because mic B sounds really good. So it's the same way with Krishna consciousness, right? The Krishna consciousness is the $400 mic, which makes the $25 mic not sound so good anymore. Now, just as a side point, because I do videos, I investigate different kinds of mics, shotgun mics, you know, which are meant for videos and this and that. And if you go on YouTube, they have mic shootouts, which means let's test this mic. Here's the $400 one, here's the $25 one. And sometimes the $25 ones almost sound as good as the $400 ones, but not quite as good. But it seems to the untrained ear that it sounds almost as good. So sometimes, because Maya is Krishna's energy, she might seem to you almost as attractive as Krishna consciousness. If that's your situation, Prabhu, female Prabhu, you are in trouble. That's all I can say. You are in dangerous waters if you think that Maya is attractive as Krishna. And certainly, Maya will try to convince you of that. And really, the only way you're not going to be convinced is you're always churning the ocean, hearing, chanting, associating, preaching, dancing like a mad man or a mad woman in the kirtan, studying Prabhupada's books, getting senior association, hearing Prabhupada Katha, like that. Then you're okay, because guaranteed what you're going to get from that is going to be better than the $25 mic. And you'll know it's better. You'll hear the difference. Okay. Krishna Karshani says, why those who seem to have had taste give it up? Anyway, I'm talking about devotees. Yeah. This is such an interesting question, especially if somebody was very advanced and had many deep realizations. You think this devotee will never leave, could never leave Krishna consciousness because they have such deep realizations, deep understandings. And then they leave and it just doesn't make sense. Well, I can't say there's only one reason somebody leaves Krishna consciousness, but I think we can conclude on the basis of this discussion that their ability to relish and go deep into Krishna consciousness was being compromised. What it was being compromised, it could be many things. It could be offenses, it could be they became unnecessarily, unduly attracted to the opposite sex. It could be they slackened their sadhana. They could have lost faith for some reason, something. But whatever it was, they gave up their hearing and chanting, which was the solution for whatever problem they had. And they were no longer relishing. You can't leave Krishna if you're deeply relishing. It doesn't work that way. So we need to relish Krishna consciousness every day. That's the point. I think if we boil this class down to its essence, I would say that's probably the most important point of this class, that we need to be deeply relishing Krishna consciousness every day, and that will keep us safe. And it won't be difficult to control our senses, because there won't be any attraction, because you're getting something which is much better. You agree? But then you're safe. And you want to perfect this life. You don't want to mess around in this life. You don't want to take it casually. Prabhupada, he wanted us to take Krishna consciousness seriously. He was always asking us to be serious. And he knew if we took it seriously, we would be unlimitedly happy. He knew that. And he wanted us to be happy. And he knew if we took it seriously, we would be fixed in Krishna consciousness, because we would be so blissful. We would never want to do anything else. Yes? So that's the idea. And if there's no other questions, I think I'll end here, because our family's going away to visit some other devotees a couple hours from here who live near the beach. Actually, they're our neighbors, but they have a house at the beach and they're selling it. And this is the last weekend I'm here with my family for about a month, so we're going to drive off. And I just spent I've been working about 14 hours a day, like every day. Crazy, right? Just to get ready to go, to get things done. So I need a little chill time. But, ladies and gentlemen, I will still be relishing Krishna consciousness, even while I'm sitting on the beach and swimming in the water, because I will always remember Krishna is the light of the sun and the moon, and the taste of water. So we will remember him even at the beach. Okay? So, yes, we'll do class tomorrow. Let's do class tomorrow at 7:30. Well, Furnished probably already advertised 6:30. Yeah, I'll have to figure out where to do it. Maybe I'll have to end up in the backyard or something. I don't know. My wife's not well. I don't know if she'll be awake. Anyway, I think it was advertised for 6:30, so yeah, let's keep it for 6:30. And then I can read some things Prabhupada has said about this, and we can talk about this a little more. It's kind of an interesting topic. I think it's interesting always to go into a little more into depth into topics that you think are very simple, or you obviously think you understand it. But sometimes when you go a little more deeply into a topic, you realize that there's aspects of it you didn't understand. There's ramifications of actions that you weren't aware of. And so I think we'll get something more tomorrow. So we'll see you back at the same time. Is that okay? 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. That's 8:30 Australian time. That is what, like 1:30 Polish time. There's like 11:30 UK time, something like that. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi Hari Hari Bol.